Field artillery in the war between the states was primarily an anti-personnel weapon. The most popular field artillery piece on both sides during the war was the 12-pound Napoleon. It was light enough to be maneuvered as a field artillery piece, yet fired full charge 12-pound ammunition. This ammunition consisted of 4 major types of projectiles. Solid or round shot was a solid iron ball. Like all other projectiles, it was attached to a wooden sabot by metal bands. The sabot improved the accuracy and served double duty by having a woolen powder bag attached to it. This meant that when loading, the powder charge, sabot, and projectile were all one piece and could be loaded with one stroke. Shell was a hollow iron ball filled with black powder and using a Borman or similar type of fuse. The fuse was a wooden plug containing a powder train in a groove. The cover was a scale graduated in seconds. The gunner estimated the range and consequent time of flight to the target and called out the number. The fuse cutter cut a hole in the fuse cover at the appropriate mark. Hopefully, the powder gases escaping past the projectile would ignite the fuse, which would burn for the required number of seconds before causing the projectile to explode. This was a very iffy thing. Problems with fuses, range estimation, and variations in muzzle velocity made it near impossible to get the projectile to explode in the right place. Spherical case was the same as shell, except that the hollow area in the shell contained a very small burster charge and a number of separate iron balls. Grape or canister shot was used on infantry at less than 400 yards. This collection of small iron balls converted the Napoleon into a giant shotgun. When the infantry closed to within 180 yards, one powder charge could be loaded with 2 containers of canister, thereby doubling the number of projectiles to 24 pounds. Explosive shell and spherical case had little bursting power and were unreliable. The preferred rounds were solid shot and canister. We will demonstrate how to load using this 6-pounder, which has been re-rifled on the James principle. After the shot, the number 3 closed off the touch hole or vent with a padded leather glove called a thumb stall. Number 1 dipped the sponge end of his rammer into a water bucket and swabbed the bore in order to extinguish any sparks remaining from the previous shot. Number 2 received the new projectile powder combination from the powder monkey and placed it at the muzzle. Number 1 reversed his rammer and rammed the cartridge home. Number 3 then removed the thumb stall from the vent and, using a vent prick, cut open the cartridge in the bore. Number 4 placed the friction primer in the vent and took the slack out of the lanyard. At any time during this process, the gunner aimed the weapon. For elevation changes, he used the hand screw mounted underneath the breech, while deflection changes were made by physically moving the trail left and right. Upon command, number 4 would give a final pull on the lanyard. The friction primer acted like a giant kitchen match and set off the propelling charge. As the gun rolled back 6 to 12 feet in recoil, the crew members seized the carriage and rolled it forward to approximately the same starting position. You may ask about rifled field artillery, but it was not that effective. Though it was more accurate, its recoil took it out of position after every shot. Each succeeding shot was the equivalent of opening fire again. The rounds could not be walked into the target. Rifles were inefficient at handling canister shot, and their explosive projectiles had a weak burster charge and an extremely unreliable contact fuse. Since the projectiles were oblong, they normally dug deeply into the ground before explosion and had little effect. It would take more than 30 years, plus the invention of high-order explosive filler, smokeless powder, cartridge cases, breech loaders, good contact fuses, and hydro-pneumatic recoil systems before field artillery had the characteristics which you and I understand today. We will watch a genuine 12-pound Napoleon being fired with solid shot and canister shot against formations of silhouette targets. We will be loading slowly and out of sequence, and we'll be using a separate powder bag of aluminum foil in order to reduce the possibility of a premature discharge. To reduce chance of misfire, the number 3 man will put priming powder down the vent before the friction primer is inserted. Infantry 400! Prime! Fire! Dean, vent. Prime! Fire! Infantry 240! Much. Prime! Fire! Prime! Fire! Prime! Fire! I am sure you expected the canister shot to be impressive, but the round shot was surprising. They bounced through the formation like a bowling ball gone berserk, Every strike upon the ground and every impact with a target created secondary projectiles which traveled through the target area at odd angles. Wartime stories of round shot hurling rifled muskets, canteens, and pieces of bodies as secondary projectiles are true. One can only imagine what it must have looked like when a battery of 6 of these were on line firing at maximum rate. During the war, maximum rate for these weapons was 4 rounds per minute. This is faster than we were firing, since we put a premium on safety and intentionally went slowly. By calculating the rate of advance of infantry using Hardee's manual and comparing this to the rate of fire, we find that an infantry unit attacking a Napoleon field piece from 1,500 yards out would, by the time they arrived at the gun, receive 676 pounds of round shot and canister from that single field piece alone. This brings up 2 important side points: Gatling guns and leadership. The Gatling gun of the war between the states was the size of this field piece, yet its combat range was exactly the same as the rifled musket. Since cartridge cases were not yet practical, Gatling gun crews had to load and prime steel sleeves as if those sleeves were .58 caliber rifled muskets. These sleeves were then fed into the gun as ammunition. After every couple of hundred rounds, they had to cease fire to reload the sleeves and clean out the vast quantities of powder fouling which escaped past the gap between sleeve and barrel. No one in his right mind would pick a Gatling gun over any smoothbore field piece. With Napoleon's belching death, why did men go forward? They were led from the front. During the war between the states, over 160 general officers from both sides were killed. All but 1 or 2 were killed leading their men in battle from the front. This is far in excess of all general officer casualties of the United States in all other wars combined. Despite the death and destruction, soldiers of both sides went forward to their job. At the Battle of Newmarket, for example, the Corps of Cadets from the Virginia Military Institute went on line near the Bushong House and charged. They crossed this field from the Bushong House to where you are standing, approximately 600 yards, and the location of a Federal battery. They not only seized the battery, they actually broke the Union line asunder, putting it to flight. The price they paid for moving across that short space of ground, some of which was dead space in which they were protected from fire, was 10 dead and 45 wounded out of 222 total engaged. I have some recovered targets. These shot with canister shot. And these hit with round shot. When you study the war, remember these targets and the range film. They will give you a new dimension on the peculiar problems of that war and the courage of the troops involved. Was the 12-pound Napoleon effective? Yes. Its canister at close range and round shot at long range was deadly. You can imagine what would happen to soldiers hit with the round shot as these targets were hit. It was not uncommon to see sights such as this: a soldier whose abdomen has been carried away and whose left hand and forearm was severed from his body by round shot.